Have you ever noticed how some people seem to carry winter in their eyes, even when the sun is shining brightly outside? At first glance, they seem distant, unreachable, even cold. But the truth, as always, hides when no one usually looks. Behind that silence, there is a story, and not just any story. It's an invisible battle between the desire to protect oneself and the desperate need to feel. Carl Jung helps us see that what we perceive as emotional coldness may in fact be the most intimate form of protection. But why would someone hide from the world like this? There's something about it that almost no one notices. Not everything that looks like indifference is the absence of feeling. Sometimes it's just exhaustion from being hurt, from trusting and falling, from trying and breaking. There is a thin line between protecting oneself and becoming inaccessible, and it is often drawn by scars no one can see. In this video, we're going to explore that hidden territory of the soul, the place where pain disguises itself as rigidity, where trauma builds silent defenses, where self-love becomes confused with isolation. We won't give you ready-made answers. We're inviting you to feel, to reflect, to remember that coldness is often just the echo of an exhausted heart. But there is something that transforms all of this, and you're about to find out. What we deny in ourselves, we see in others as fate. Carl Jung. Sometimes emotional coldness is not a choice. It's armor, invisible but dense as steel, a silent response to a world that has often been cruel. When someone withdraws emotionally, it's not necessarily because they stopped feeling, but because feeling became too dangerous. Every attempt at closeness came with deep wounds, and when pain becomes recurrent, the unconscious learns to defend itself by cutting connection, freezing emotions, creating distance. It's in this frozen space that protection finds a home. Because for many, love became synonymous with pain. And that's when coldness stops being absence and becomes defense. Trauma, silently, creates barriers that the conscious mind doesn't even notice. The person no longer opens up, not because they don't want to, but because they learned the hard way that opening up is the same as exposure, and exposure in the past was the stage of pain. Can you see the delicacy of this mechanism? It's as if the body is saying, something inside has already been shattered too deeply, and now I can't risk it anymore. But that's not weakness. On the contrary, it's an extremely sophisticated form of psychological survival, a kind of shield that allows one to keep moving, even if emotionally anesthetized. The problem is that, in protecting against what hurts, we also block what heals, because only what is felt can be healed. Emotional coldness, while it prevents new wounds, also prevents the warmth of true connection. And in this paradox, the person finds themselves trapped, safe but alone, intact but disconnected. The soul asks for protection, but longs for presence. What few understand is that this distancing isn't lack of interest, it's memory. Every withdrawal, every silence, is an unconscious reminder that in the past, it was safer not to show anything. And the more intense the pain was, the stronger the defense became. After all, the unconscious doesn't differentiate past from present. It only protects. And here arises one of the greatest emotional traps. The more someone tries not to suffer, the more they distance themselves from the chance to love. And love, when it can no longer find a way in, becomes sick. Coldness crystallizes and becomes identity. She's cold, they say. But no, she's tired. Of trusting, of hoping, of being silently broken. It's important to say this doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, a build-up of small unprocessed pains that become an invisible wall between feeling and living. Protection becomes prison, and the prison, over time, becomes the only emotional reality possible. But there is one detail that changes everything. What we do not face in ourselves, we will meet as fate. Carl Jung. Not all pain screams. Some hide in restrained gestures, in eyes that look away, in silences that weigh heavily. Hidden pain is the hardest to see. And precisely because of that, the hardest to heal. It hides behind emotional rigidity, as if the soul had learned not to show what it feels so it wouldn't be consumed by it. There are people who don't cry, not because they don't feel, but because at some point, crying was seen as a weakness. This kind of pain doesn't arrive loudly. It installs itself subtly, until one day, feeling becomes a burden. Emotional coldness in this context is not the absence of emotion. It's an excess of accumulated pain, encapsulated in silence. Trauma creates a new internal code. If I show what I feel, I might get hurt again. And then, rigidity is born. The body stiffens, speech shortens, eyes lose their shine. But all of this, in truth, is language. Silence starts to say more than any word ever could. It tells stories of abandonment, rejection, and deep disappointments that never found a safe space to be expressed. It's as if every withdrawal were a silent plea for understanding. But how can we understand what isn't said? How can we hold space for what hides even from the one who feels it? Pain, when it doesn't find a healthy outlet, becomes a barrier. And that barrier is often mistaken for coldness, indifference, or disinterest. But those who only see the surface miss what's essential, the protective gesture behind the behaviour. Because at some point in the past, showing pain was dangerous. It was punished. Or worse, it was ignored. This emotional rigidity is not vanity nor arrogance. It's self-preservation. An unconscious way of keeping the world at a safe distance. The problem is, in that distancing, the person also moves away from themselves. They stop accessing the deeper parts of their own soul, and over time they even forget what it was like before all this. Before the fear, before the defense. Carl Jung reminds us that what remains unconscious controls us, and camouflaged pain, by not being acknowledged, keeps shaping relationships, choices, and perceptions. It defines how much someone opens up, or how much they retreat, how much they trust, or how much they doubt. Without anyone noticing, it steers life from the shadows. And this leads us to something even deeper. The soul needs inner security to open up to the outer world. Carl Jung. She didn't become distant by choice. She shut down because the world, time and again, taught her that opening up was far too dangerous. The woman who now seems cold, indifferent, may once have been deeply sweet, vulnerable, open-hearted. But somewhere along the road, something broke. Maybe it was a betrayal, an absence, a promise unfulfilled, or more deeply, a series of small wounds that together taught her that feeling too much hurts too much. This woman who now avoids eye contact, who replies with few words, who builds walls instead of bridges, once loved with everything she had. She once leapt with no safety net, believed with her whole heart. And precisely because of that, she felt the weight of the fall even more intensely. What the world calls emotional coldness, she calls survival. Because it was in self-protection that she found shelter. Even if that shelter made her a stranger to herself, she doesn't shut down because she doesn't feel. She shuts down because she feels too much. The trauma of having been neglected, manipulated, made invisible in relationships that were supposed to hold her, built a logic of defense within her. If I don't open up, I can't be hurt. But the cost of that is high. Disconnection. From others, from her own essence, from the warmth she once offered so generously, and deep down, she misses it. Opening up, laughing without fear, loving without measuring. But there's a tight knot in her throat that blocks her from surrendering. A subtle but constant fear of reliving everything she fought so hard to forget. And so, she puts on the armour. She faces the world with a calm face, but a heart on alert. And no one notices the silent war happening inside her with every attempt at closeness. It's as if she was saying, "Please don't hurt me again." But she doesn't say it. She stays silent. Hopes someone will see beyond. Hopes someone will understand that her rigidity is, in truth, a plea. A plea for care, for patience, for a space where she can finally rest from the internal battles she fights every single day. Because yes, being in a constant state of defense is exhausting. And she is tired. For her, inner healing doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with presence, with listening, with the feeling that maybe, this time, she can let her guard down. But until then, she keeps going. Strong on the outside, fragile on the inside. Not by choice, but by necessity. And when we look at this through the lens of Jung, we understand that this woman's unconscious isn't crying out for isolation, but for safety, for a place where she no longer has to choose between love and protection, where she can finally exist, whole, but there is a key she still needs to find. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Jung. All emotional protection is born from a deep desire for safety. And safety in this context has nothing to do with the external world. It has to do with the inner territory. The woman who shuts down is not just looking for someone trustworthy. She is unconsciously trying to rebuild her trust in herself. Because when pain takes hold, it shatters not only faith in others, but also faith in one's own judgment. This need for internal security is older than any relationship. It comes from childhood, from experiences where affection was conditional, where the expression of feelings was punished or ignored. In those environments, the unconscious learns that feeling is dangerous, and throughout life that message echoes. The body tightens, the mind withdraws, and the soul begins to tiptoe through its own emotions. But the paradox is that this safety cannot be found in another. No matter how loving they may be, it must be built within. One must regain the trust that it's possible to feel, to open up, to be vulnerable, without disappearing in the process. It is this sense of inner safety that allows defences to lower without fear of collapse. And it doesn't come all at once. It is cultivated little by little, through small acts of presence with oneself. Jung spoke of the importance of integrating the shadow. And in this context, the shadow is everything this woman learned to reject in herself. Her sensitivity, her longing for affection, her neediness, her repressed anger. Only by embracing these exiled parts can the inner foundation of identity be rebuilt. Without that, any attempt at closeness will be perceived as a threat, not as an opportunity for connection. Emotional coldness, then, is not the problem. It is the symptom. The real challenge is the silent insecurity that lives behind it. The inner voice that asks, "Can I truly show myself and still be loved?" When this question has no answer, the defense instinct takes over. But when it starts to be heard with compassion, something inside begins to melt. This inner reconstruction requires courage, because looking inward isn't always beautiful. It means facing trauma, guilt, unprocessed memories. But it is also where freedom lives, in the reconciliation with what was denied, hidden, silenced. It's in facing these wounds that true inner healing begins. And it's at this point in the journey that everything starts to change. The only thing that truly transforms is the emotion we allow ourselves to feel. Carl Jung. Allowing oneself to feel is perhaps one of the soul's greatest acts of courage. Because to truly feel requires presence, and presence requires surrender. For someone who has spent a lifetime in protection, feeling again is like walking on glass. Every step comes with fear. Every emotion echoes with past pain. But the heart was not made to live anesthetized. It beats for connection, for meaning, for warmth. There comes a moment when the pain of protecting oneself becomes greater than the fear of getting hurt. And in that moment, silent, almost imperceptible, something inside begins to open. The tears, once held back, fall without guilt. The anger once swallowed is finally named, and the tenderness once dismissed returns to touch the chest. It is not a grand transformation, it is subtle. But that's where it all begins. Feeling is not a risk. Feeling is the bridge to inner healing. But trauma teaches the opposite. It says, if you feel, it will hurt again. And so we freeze. But Jung reminds us that pain must be faced, or it becomes fate. And feeling is the only way not to be ruled by what hides in the shadow. When we allow ourselves to feel, even with fear, we are saying, I trust myself to walk through this. This trust is built little by little. And each time an emotion is felt without guilt, without censorship, the body relaxes. The soul breathes. Emotional coldness begins to melt, not because someone forced it to, but because the heart found safety to beat again. And in this process, vulnerability stops being a threat and becomes strength. It takes courage to abandon defenses, to look in the mirror and say, yes, I was hurt, but that doesn't define what I deserve. Courage to open your heart knowing it might hurt, and still open. Because to live fully is just that act, to risk feeling, even after so long denying it, even with fear, even without guarantees. In the end, this is the silent revolution that transforms the soul. It's not grand gestures, nor epic love stories. It's the simple and profound act of feeling again, of accepting one's humanity, of gently touching one's own scars and saying, it's okay, I can come back now. And then everything makes sense. Coldness was never absence. It was excess, an excess of pain, of silence, of memories that never found words. Emotional detachment, so often judged as coldness, is in truth a muffled scream, a disguised plea. Please don't hurt me again. But what almost no one sees is that by protecting herself so much, she also distances herself from what she longs for the most. Because deep down, she doesn't want to be cold. She wants to be held. She wants to feel safe enough to be whole, without having to trade her sensitivity for survival. And the most painful truth is, no one ever taught her how. The trauma didn't erase her desire to love. It only distorted her sense of safety. And that changes everything. Because now she understands. The problem was never feeling too much, but not knowing where to put all of it. So she chose to freeze. And for years that was necessary. But today, maybe it no longer is. And then, everything makes sense. Emotional coldness was just a reflection of the desperate attempt to protect a heart that had already been shattered. It was armour, not identity. A defence, not essence. And now in understanding this, she realises she can begin to take off that armour, slowly, gently, without rushing. Because true safety is born when she allows herself to be who she is, even if that means being vulnerable, even if it hurts. Because feeling, although frightening, is also freeing. And in that moment, she understands. The love she's searching for outside must first bloom within, in the form of acceptance, of kindness toward herself, of courage to feel, even if no one else understands. In the end, the answer was always there, in the silence that asked to be heard, in the coldness that begged for warmth, in the defense that only wanted peace. But are we ready to accept that? You seem cold, but you're just tired of being hurt. That phrase is not a judgment. It's a hug, a silent recognition of the pain you've carried alone, of the strength you had to build just to keep going. But maybe, just maybe, now is the time to transform that defense into reconnection. Because what once was coldness can become presence. What once was trauma can become wisdom. And what once was protection can make space for inner healing. Carl Jung taught us that looking inward is the first step to awakening. And to awaken, in this context, is to recognize that your sensitivity was never a weakness. It has always been your greatest power. If you've made it this far, you've already begun the process. You've planted a seed of reconciliation with your own soul. Now is the time to take the first step. Start today by applying these ideas. Allow yourself to feel without guilt, to embrace without losing yourself, to protect yourself without isolating. Tell me in the comments, which part of this reflection touched you the most? Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to feel less alone on this journey. And if you want to go even deeper into this transformation, there's another video above that can further expand your understanding of all this. See you in the next video.